Welcome to TFP, the Theatrefolk Podcast, the place to be for drama teachers, drama students, and theater educators everywhere. I'm Lindsay Price, resident playwright for Theatrefolk. Hello. I hope you're well. Thanks for listening. This is episode 104, and you can find all the links, and there will be links today at theatrefolk.com/episode 104. And I want to point out a very special link in those show notes, dramateacheracademy.com. What is that, you ask? Stay tuned to the end of the podcast, and I'll tell you all about it. Today, I'm talking to Theatrefolk Playwright Allison Williams. Allison and I go way back. It's a wonderful, rollicking conversation, as all our conversations are. And we're going to talk about the question, why Shakespeare? So let's find out. All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me here on the podcast. And today I have a very special guest, Allison Williams. Hello.
Hello.
Now, I do this with most of our podcast guests, but I think this one's pretty interesting. Please tell everybody where you are sitting right now.
I am in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty unique.
So it's kind of cool. I'm here as a freelance writer and a journalist, and there's some really interesting things happening right now around here that I'm sure many of you are seeing in the news and that I'm excited to discover more of the human face of. Which brings us to Shakespeare.
Oh, you're the best. You're like the...
How about that segue?
How about that segue? So Allison has been a Theatrefolk staple for many, many years. Many of you, I'm sure, have read her work that we love to have in our catalog all the way back to, and I'm not saying the year because I don't remember. It's too frightening to think about.
We've known each other for a beautiful, long friendship.
That's right. But her first play with us was Hamlet. L-E-T-T-E, which some people affectionately call Hamletty. Then there is...
Hamlet, Princess of Denmark.
That's right. And then we also have Beth, because we don't say the Scottish name, the Scottish play's name. We have Drop Dead Juliet, where Juliet decides she's tired of the death, less death, more love.
Love stories end with weddings, not with funerals.
Exactly. Do you know how hard it is to take blood out of a dress? And then her brand new play that is we have, and I hold in my hot little hands, it's still fresh off the press, and that is Postcards from Shakespeare. So we're going to talk about Postcards from Shakespeare in just a little bit, but the first thing that we want to talk about, and I want to talk about with you, Allison, is why Shakespeare? Why does Shakespeare tickle you so much that you choose to adapt it over and over again?
Oh man, I love Shakespeare. It is the greatest material ever. And people always say, Shakespeare is eternal. And I think about why, and it's like, because he writes the same stuff that we all deal with: love, sex, death, fear, power. And his language, it's elevated for us, but it was common language at the time. And that's why I love doing the spoofs, because it points out how current Shakespeare is. Midsummer Night's Dream as a sporting event. Well, it's teams of people running through the woods, each of them fighting for possession. And commentating is exactly what Puck does in the play. So my hope is that when the actors work with this material, it'll not only be fun, but it will give them greater insight into the original play. And I mean, you look at a play like Measure for Measure. Nobody does Measure for Measure. Nobody. And you're not going to do it in your high school anytime soon, But the idea that this Duke says, hey, sleep with me and I'll stay your brother's execution. And he says that to a nun. And she goes to her brother and he says, well, you're going to do it, right? And that's something we can all identify with. Not that we're nuns or dudes in jail, but we've all been in a position where we had to decide whether or not to compromise our morals to help out a friend. And I think that's why Shakespeare is so powerful, because he's dealing with the same things that all of humanity is dealing with.
Romeo and Juliet, I always say it's not about that language, it's about a boy and a girl who fell in love with each other and they weren't supposed to. That's what every high school student is going through.
Yeah. Must close chat window, parent over shoulder.
And I'm totally with you on that whole notion of universality. So how, with that though, it's the news keeps coming over and over again. Should we be studying Shakespeare? Should Shakespeare be in the classroom? Oh, I can't. And this not only comes from the students, it comes from the teachers. Teachers don't want to teach Shakespeare. So how do we keep it fresh? And why? Why should we study Shakespeare?
I think studying Shakespeare gives us an appreciation for beautiful language that we can then take into the language that is our colloquial language today. I think when we do teach Shakespeare, it's really important to stress that at the time, this was not elevated language. This was common language. This was everyday language. This was colloquial language. And I think there's a lot of advantages to looking at the different ways different characters speak and pointing out, this guy's supposed to be speaking like a redneck hick, and this is what about his speech tells us that.
Hey, and I'm going to put this link in the show notes, but I just saw this really awesome YouTube video in which this woman basically outlines that, Shakespeare actually sounds like people from the South. That because of the way that language has changed, and that when they came over from England on the Mayflower into Virginia, that the way that and it moves into Alabama and Arkansas and Georgia, that drawl and that lengthening of tones is actually closer to the way that Shakespeare speaks than that posh accent of today. And if we
Elizabeth sounded like Jeff Foxworthy.
But if we could get that into students, that's something that they can hold on to, that it is close to them, it is relevant to them.
I think it's an important thing to try in the language of Shakespeare, because we're so used nowadays, we're so used to, it's CGI, it's a stunt man, but when we actually speak the language, when we read it aloud, when we play it, when we hear it, it lets us take it into ourselves in a way that watching a movie does not let us take it into ourselves. And I mean, so much of Shakespeare is about masquerading. Like in the play, I have this joke, no one will know I'm a girl if I put on this hat. And it's a recurring joke, but I think that says something greater, that we're trying to hide our true selves out of fear or out of wanting to be something that the one we love will want, but we're not as hidden as we think we are. And in some ways, that's also about acting, about pretending that we are someone with power or pretending that we are someone with courage. And I think the greatness of Shakespeare's characters, the nobility of some of his characters, I think that play acting those characters, play acting people more powerful than ourselves, helps us try on power and helps us try on courage. And I think that's why it's important to read it out loud and to teach it.
Well, and there you're hitting on something else too, is that we have got to a place, particularly in our English classrooms, where Shakespeare isn't read aloud, where it's that silent reading, and that is the death.
In Shakespeare's day, people didn't say, I'm going to watch a play. They said, I'm going to hear a play. The sound was primary. The sound was the most important part.
Well, that's what they had, right? If they're standing in the Globe Theater and, and no stage lights. And if you're one of the groundlings and you're in the pit, how much can you're craning your neck. Maybe you've got someone tall in front of you. What are you actually seeing? Shakespeare is very much an oral experience. And I think that's something that maybe is a great exercise to really hit home in your classroom, is that to just take a speech, take to be or not to be, or whatever it is you're studying, and hit what are the sounds? What are the vowels? And what happens when you hit how many O's are there in a speech? And how does that incorporate into the emotion when you are really chewing on those words?
And reading it out loud makes it so much more understandable. And I mean, not necessarily for your high school classroom, but when you read it out loud, you also kind of figure out where the dirty jokes are too. And Shakespeare is full of them.
That's my favorite when I talk to teachers and, they talk about all the subjects that they can't say and all the subjects that they can't do. In the modern plays, we get it all the time about, we have to cut such and such and such and such. And then we say, well, what about Shakespeare? And it's usually, the administration just is not quite knowing that language is rife with, the worst, the dirtiest.
Well, I mean, Hamlet basically calls Ophelia a hoe.
And more, there are other words which shall not be named here that he calls her, So.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, that whole scene where they're watching the play and he wants to put his head in the lap.
Yes.
Oh, man. See, and I think in some ways that can be a fun way to engage your students is, you don't have to tell them explicitly what it is, but you can say to them, this is a scene that for some teachers in the past was considered controversial because it's a little bit dirty, so see if you guys can think like what parts of it might be a little bit dirty. And that makes them pay closer attention to the language. Your class, don't start them on a rabbit that they're going to have too much fun running, but it can be a really interesting exercise.
And also we'll bring up here that, all schools have their rules, which, are following, and you don't want to lose your job because you
abide by your local regulations.
Exactly so. You don't want to lose your job because you mentioned you got students to point out a certain word in a scene in Hamlet. So that would be the most ironic. That would be so let's not do that. However, this is how you bring Shakespeare to life. You read it out loud. You focus on the fact that it is not dusty. This language is actually very ribald. The fact that it's the stories that we want to connect to.
And that's why I love writing the spoof versions, because I think the students have a much greater understanding of the major play, the regular play, when they've done the spoof. It's not only fun to do, but it also gives them some insight into the original. Let's lay bare Lady M's motivations. She wants to throw the best party in the kingdom. Well, that's functionally what she wants. It's just expressed in more heightened language.
And also, too, is that a lot of times we will have customers who do, for example, the spoof version, Mbeth, and then they'll also do our original language adaptation, we've got, and that we hear from teachers that seeing the spoof version just opened up every door, not only for the students who were in the play, but for the students who watched the play.
Yeah, suddenly they understood what's going on. And it's so much easier to return to the text and start reading it when you already understand what's happening and you can watch for the clues in the language.
Okay, so you have acted in Shakespeare and you have directed Shakespeare. So as an actor, let's do both. As an actor of Shakespeare, when you are preparing a role, what do you think is your most valuable tool?
That Shakespeare is incredibly easy to memorize. We look at iambic pentameter and we kind of beat it out like a rhythm, da-da, 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 and we never really let students know why it's in iambic pentameter. Well, it's in iambic pentameter because it makes it easy to memorize. I mean, Shakespeare is the easiest lines to memorize I have ever had because they have that rhythm. They have that rhythm of natural speech. There's a great story I love that one of my Shakespeare teachers told me, and she was a nun. She was a teaching nun, and she was explaining to the class about iambic pentameter. And one of the kids said, "But sister, we don't talk like that in life. But sister, we don't talk like that in life."
Exactly.
And it's so I think Shakespeare has given these incredible tools. And also if you observe the punctuation in Shakespeare, that also gives you clues as to what to do with the acting. I think you guys are planning on at some point doing a course with that in your Drama Teacher Academy. But just this idea that there are clues in the text for how to act, how to behave. And Shakespeare, there's no subtext. Anytime anybody thinks something or feels something, it comes right out of their mouth and they announce it to the audience. And that's so useful for actors.
And as a director, when you are directing Shakespeare, for all of our teachers out there who are maybe afraid of taking on directing the Bard, what's your good tip for directing Shakespeare?
Table work. And sometimes it's hard to make table work fun. So you might want to do just a little bit of it at a time unless you really are into it and your students are really into it. But just sitting around a table, reading each line out loud and making sure that everyone knows what it means can be really important. And it really helps the students identify their characters and understand what they're saying. And so then when they get up and start acting, it's so much easier for them because they're not trying to navigate the set and their fellow actor and the text. They've already navigated the text and they're able to start acting it. So I really think sitting down and going through the language is very useful and very valuable and saves a lot of heartache later on when you look at a student and say, "Billy, do you know what you're saying there?" And Billy goes,
That's a pretty good clue. I think that talking head syndrome is an issue sometimes with the Shakespeare play. What's a good tip to give to teachers in terms of blocking Shakespeare?
Again, I would say pay attention to the clues in the text. There are times when a character says, keep seat, which means the other person just started to stand up. So that gives you some clues. But I'd also recommend have some fun with it. I mean, yes, there are directors who say, if I never see another Old West Taming of the Shrew, it will be too soon. But it can be really helpful to lay a contemporary theme over your Shakespeare. It gives the actors ideas for what to do because it ties it closer to a situation where they know what the action would be. If you're doing Old West Taming of the Shrew, that tells you something about how Petruchio walks into town and slams open the saloon doors. If you're doing modern gang Romeo and Juliet, it gives them an idea of who these people are and what these characters are like. And I think that brings the play to life for the audience as well as for the actors. So, some people are kind of like, just do the play. But I think it's more fun when we draw the parallel relationships a little bit more clearly to the audience and to the actors.
Awesome. That's great. Okay, let's get into Postcards from Shakespeare. What's the premise behind this play?
Shakespeare is suffering from writer's block, and he suffers from it right there on stage with it acted out. And we kind of see that he's having a hard time writing. And Queen Elizabeth, who is his friend, gives him some money and says, dude, go on vacation and see if you can get some new ideas. And then the rest of the play is Shakespeare sketching out on postcards these new ideas for the Queen.
Yes, and it goes back and forth, and he sends her letters of the idea. He goes to Denmark and sort of roughs out Hamlet. He goes to Verona. He goes to Egypt, Venice. And so we kind of get to see the genesis of writing process in a spoofy way.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I like this idea that I kind of point up how Shakespeare recycled plots and recycled tropes.
I love that.
In a way that writers do. And one of the great joys for me was being able to put in plays that most people are not familiar with and still have it be a joke. There's a moment in the Troilus and Cressida scene when Troilus and Cressida are talking about, it's the morning, I hear the lark, please don't leave me. And Troilus says, whoa, wait a minute. Larks, dawn, please don't leave me. Haven't we heard all this before? And Shakespeare says, no. This is a completely different play about two teenagers whose families try to keep them apart. In this one, you live and everyone else dies.
See, and I love that because I've read Troilus and Cressida and I kind of forgot about that and literally went, holy smokes, and went running back to the script and kind of looked and went, it's the same play. And then the whole idea of that Much Ado About Nothing, that Beatrice and Benedict are older couples who don't get along, which is kind of like Taming of the Shrew, where we have two older couples who don't get along.
I have to say one of my favorite moments in the entire play is Richard II storms in, and we've just seen the Welsh army cross over and run off stage, and Richard II storms in and he's like, I know I had 10,000 soldiers around here somewhere. And Queen Elizabeth says, how did he lose a whole army? And Shakespeare says, it makes sense in context. And Elizabeth says, I didn't read the whole thing. And Shakespeare says, nobody else has either. And I love that, because I originally started writing this as a full length before I took it to a competition length. My original intent was to include every single play. And I have to say, I am really, really happy that I got in Pericles and Coriolanus and Timon of Athens.
It's just, and I think I quite like that. Oh, and way more, like The Winter's Tale, the Henrys. We've got Henry IV, parts 1 and 2. And it's, at the high school age, there's really a very small canon of Shakespeare that students do and can do. I think Julius Caesar is a great play. I love Julius Caesar, but how many high schools have one girl and 40 guys? Like it just doesn't happen. And how many Midsummer Night's Dreams have we seen? And
because Midsummer Night's Dreams has 8 leads and half of them are women.
Well, and then the other half you can make women,
Yeah, exactly.
So what I really like about this play, and it just gives an opportunity within the realm, it is written, for the high school market, and that it's got a wonderfully large cast, and that we can just we can visit some plays that they never would visit in a wonderful comedic fashion.
Yeah, and in a way that's funny. Like one of the really rewarding experiences for me was I read the initial draft of this play with a group of students in Utah. Shout out to Weber High School. Thank you guys. Thank you, Mr. Daniels. And at the end of the reading, the teacher came up to me and he was actually kind of embarrassed. Bless him. He said, I'm so embarrassed that they didn't know, half of these plays. They couldn't pronounce the names. And I'm like, dude, they laughed at all of the jokes. And that was the great feedback that I got from them. They were like, we don't know all of these plays, but it was still funny. And that for me was like the biggest and most fun challenge in writing it, was making it funny and including a whole bunch of really obscure plays. And making it many girls.
Yes, many girls as you need. You hear that, schools? Many girls. But talk about the process for writing this. So you've got your Shakespeare, so that's not easy. And it's also comedy. And I think comedy is way harder of the two, it's the hardest to write. So what's your process when you are working on a play like this?
Well, when I'm writing a Shakespeare spoof, the first thing I do is reread at least some of the original. And I also look for a summary of the original that I usually find online and kind of look and go, okay, what are the key scenes that I really want to have in here? How can I tell this story in the fewest possible scenes? I pick out the famous lines because it's good to have the famous lines in there. And I pick out lines that make me as the actor or me as the director go, wait, you said what? Because I think those are some great moments of comedy. And I look for stuff that can be taken literally. There's a moment in Postcards from Shakespeare where Antigonus yells out as he's leaving the stage, "Exit pursued by a bear." And Queen Elizabeth says, nobody can afford to put a bear on stage. And for me, that's the joke as the actor for me, that we've got this famous stage direction, but really, who's going to put a bear on stage? From that point, I try to draft it out into scenes and then make there be some kind of overarching framework that gives somebody something that they want. And then I read it out loud with students and I make smiley faces every time they laugh at the line. Then I go home and I look through, and any page that does not have at least 3 smiley faces on it needs more jokes. And I deliberately write more jokes for any page with not enough smileys.
It's the dreaded, this play has half a smiley on it. This page has half a smiley on it.
This page has half a smiley, yeah. Because you need, there's this theory that, if you have entertained the audience, they will stay with you for as long as they were entertained. So if they're laughing really hard for 3 minutes, they're with you for 3 more minutes until you have to be funny again. So you really have to pay attention and make sure that the laughs keep coming. And I really do that in kind of a precise and technical way. Some of it is, woo, it's funny, what's going on here, and just riffing. And some of it is, okay, I need a line that responds to this and it needs to end with chicken so that I can bring out a rubber chicken. Side note, there is no rubber chicken in this play, but if you would like to put one in, feel free. And so it gets very technical.
I think comedy is very technical for just that precise reason. And it's all about rhythm and beats.
It really is. And, you've got to end a sentence that's a punchline on a downbeat. You've got to end with a hard consonant whenever you can. There's a reason why a word that ends in CK is very popular with comedians. It's got a funny sound. It's a punctuating word, and so you restructure. And that's a way. I just started doing Twitter a couple of weeks ago. And that's a way that Twitter has really helped me is I start writing this really funny line and then all of a sudden I'm out of characters. So I have to go back and go, okay, how can I restructure this to be as funny as possible in the shortest amount of time?
And what I think is also, and it's very technical and it's very like, okay, joke, but your ending is not funny. It's very powerful and it's very poignant. And if you guys want to see the ending, you're going to have to go find the play. But I don't lie and say, and Allison knows that I tell the truth when it comes to her work, that it made me tear up. And I think that
it made me tear up writing it.
I'll bet, and that's a credit to when comedy works. That there's a difference between a sketch and a play, and a sketch is a moment, and a play is a journey. And that's what we've got here in this play: is that Shakespeare gets to the end, and he is able to move on, and how his work has helped him. Finding these works have helped him, and that's an interesting note.
Yeah. And for me, it really reflects some of my process as a writer too. You know, this constant, like, is this good enough? Is this good enough? Is this good enough? And I think that when we're playing comedy on a stage, I think we satisfy the audience, because so much of comedy is about people trying desperately to get something they want and not getting it. And I think we satisfy the audience when at the end, somebody gets it. They receive what they have been fighting for and what we have been rooting for them to have. And I think that makes it a very satisfying play to watch, I hope, and to do.
I think so too. Wonderful talk, Allison. Again, I'm amazed by the technology as I'm sitting here in Ontario, Canada, and you are sitting on basically the other side of the world. And yet here we are having a conversation about the power of Shakespeare, power of technology, the power of Shakespeare. I think that's a lovely note to end on. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I love talking to Allison. Thank you very much. She always has something to say, and I encourage you to go check out her new play, Postcards from Shakespeare, and you can catch the links to all of Allison's plays in the show notes, theatrefolk.com/episode 104. Before we go, let's do some Theatrefolk news. All right, if I had a trumpet, I would be using it right now. Today's the day. Today's the day. Woohoo! So today is the day for our brand new product launch, our brand new project that Craig and I have been working on for, months and months and months now. It is the Drama Teacher Academy. What is the Drama Teacher Academy? Well, let me tell you, because I'm thrilled to bits. I'm very excited, and I can't wait for it to be out in the world, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. So, DTA, it is the premier spot for workshops on demand, specifically designed for drama teachers. If you want to move forward as a drama teacher, improve your skills, it's all about professional development. If you want to take charge of your professional development, consider becoming a member, because that's what DTA is. The Drama Teacher Academy is a professional development membership site just for drama teachers, where you're going to have access to workshops on demand and lesson plans that you can take into your classroom. Because as a teacher, I know that you know this. You should never stop learning. Right? Even an experienced teacher can learn new things. And what makes a workshop useful are practical applications, hints, tips, exercises that you can use with your students. Every DTA course answers the question, how can I use this in my classroom? And the courses are taught in multiple ways. We have video for them, but you don't have to watch video. If your computer doesn't play videos very well, or maybe you don't have the time, that's okay. We want you to learn the material at a pace and through a method that works best for you. You can learn at your own pace. You can watch the videos on computer. You can download an MP3, put it on your iPod, listen on your way to work, multitask. You can download and print the transcript. You can read, when you have a moment here or there. Some of the classes that we are going to be launching with is an Introduction to Teaching Mask with Allison Williams, who you just heard from, Postcards from Shakespeare. Organized Chaos, Discipline in the Theater Classroom with Matt Webster. Classroom management is such a very relevant topic these days. How do we manage these theater classes that seem so chaotic and out of control? How can we make them creative and fun, but also manageable? From Audition to Curtain Call, Directing Youth Theater with Stephen Stack. Are you a first-time director? Do you have no idea how to go from audition to show? Are you an experienced director and you want, maybe a refresher course? And then from me, top 10 playwriting exercises. I find that sometimes that students, they jump into the deep end with their writing and they just dive into that big script and it falters and they don't know why. It's because they haven't practiced the craft. They haven't worked up to being ready to write a play. Like when someone is learning how to play basketball, they have to learn how to dribble. When you learn how to swim, you don't throw someone into the deep end. You learn the skills, you learn the elements first, and that's what we're going to do. So all you have to do, go to the show notes, episode 104, go to Drama Teacher Academy, all one word, dramateacheracademy.com, learn more, become a member, and learn. Finally, where can you find this podcast? Well, we post new episodes every Wednesday at theatrefolk.com and on our Facebook page and Twitter. You can find us on youtube.com/theatrefolk. You can find us on the Stitcher app, and you can subscribe to TFP on iTunes. All you have to do is search for the word Theatrefolk. And that's where we're going to end. Take care, my friends. Take care.